How many children did he end up having?
He had 4 children. 2 were adopted, but he didn't really, it was 2 stepkids essentially now. His second wife was a widow, and he ended up living with them and having another child with her. And then his last wife, Tessa, he had a child with. So he's got 4 children, and as an FYI, they control the Philip K. Dick estate, right, and they're known to be pretty rabid. So if you're like, dude, I got this great idea, I want to adapt this, like, I'm going to adapt the Crack of Space, it's going to be this really cool book. Good luck. Yeah, good luck fighting through that quagmire. And I've not gone that far yet. But yeah, 4 kids.
You haven't mentioned his father or any type of influence from a father.
Yeah, his father was mostly absent in his life, which is another kind of theme that you'll see throughout his work, is the absent father figure. In the Three Stigmata, Palmer Eldritch, there's a character named Leo Boulero, who Phil modeled after a boss that he had when he worked at the record shop. And that was the closest thing Phil really had to a father. His father was worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and often traveled, and then his parents divorced when he was like 5. And so he really didn't see his father very often, and didn't like his father also. So you'll see that searching for God and that searching for a higher power possibly manifested through his lack of having a father figure. Maybe another explanation. Okay, we're about at the halfway point, so let's move on. Oh, this is the real fun part. That was just the reality stuff we had to get out of the way. Phil had 2 big questions that he asked. First, what is human? The second, what is reality? Now, sometimes Phil said these 2 were connected. He said, to be human is to be in reality. And if you take away being human, then you're no longer in reality. And sometimes he said, oh no, reality is separate from humanness. And you'll see this a lot in his works. He says one thing, and then he immediately contradicts himself. And then he says another thing, and he immediately contradicts himself. And it's just one of the things that he does. And I think it's cool because you can see his oscillation. You can see him able to simultaneously have 2 different beliefs and try to fuse them together into this synthesis. Here's the really fascinating part for me. One of the best known Philip K. Dick's works is Blade Runner. And Blade Runner's essential question is, what is human? It's really what's been largely collected by our society as his ongoing legacy. However, in the exegesis, Phil says that his most important work is the 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. Did anyone happen to read 3 Stigmata? Has anybody read 3 Stigmata here? Thanks, Phil. Tim, you're my Phil today, Tim. I think the 3 Stigmata is Phil's most important work. And he says it is his most important work. He says at one point, the 3 Stigmata is a unique book in the history of writing. There's nothing that's ever been like it, and if anything is going to be kept in our collective consciousness, it will be this book. And yet no one's read it, no one knows about it. So I find that kind of fascinating. This is probably the best book you can buy from him, by the way. This is 4 novels in the 1960s. So you get The Man in the High Castle, The 3 Stigmata, Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, and Ubik. This is your best, like, bam! This is the solid PKD purchase. It's like a starter pack, in a sense. So, Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep asks the question, what is human? The 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch asks the question, what is reality? This one is getting a lot of traction, and this one is being largely ignored. And so why is this happening? And I've been thinking about it for a long time. I finally found a solution. This is going to be a lot of fun. You're in for a treat. The question, what is human, is answered pretty well by Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. Liz probably knows, right? This is what Phil said. He said, to be human is to have empathy. That is the definition of humanness, is empathy. And that gets pretty tricky in Do Android's Dream, because the androids, some of them, have more empathy than the humans. And so you've got androids who are more empathetic than humans, and therefore the android is more human than the human. And that was his conclusion. And you know what? I kind of agree with him. Like, yeah, I think being empathetic is a great way to define humanity, and that means we should be nice to our robots, and we should build them to be nice to us. And kind of a weird thing happens here when you start with defining human as empathy, though. Watch what happens if we try to increase the empathy. We're going to keep cranking the empathy button. Now, here's what happens. To have empathy is to understand each other. And that's one of Phil's main themes, is understanding. So if we have empathy for each other, then I understand you. But if we crank empathy all the way to the max, and we have full empathy, then it's no longer I understand you. It's at 100% empathy, if we wanted to quantify it, we have I am you. Ooh, that gets weird. Because we're in this state that Phil called being, and if you read cosmogony and cosmology, he uses this term a lot, isomorphic. It's kind of a science term that means being in an identical state. If you have an isomorphic state, well, we're all kind of the same. We're all together. And reality gets pretty weird. Here's how I want to explain this to you. There's a study done in the 1930s, or maybe it was the 40s. I gotta find it again because I've lost it. The study is called a mask study. In the mask study, they took, and this is the time, the 1930s, they did that kind of some really dubious psychological research, by the way. In this mask study, researchers took a toddler, 2 to 3 years old, and they would bring the toddler into a room with their trusted parent, where the other parent would be in a chair, sitting, wearing a mask. And the researchers would kind of look at what the child's reaction was to the mask. They oftentimes would show fear, and they'd use a benign mask, but they would gauge the child's reaction. And then they'd have the parent take off the mask, and the child would be, happy. Oh, I would recognize my parent, right? Then they repeated the mask study. In the second trial of the mask study, they had the toddler brought into the room, and they had the trusted parent there wearing a mask. They'd have the parent take off the mask, and then under the mask was a second mask. Once the parent took off the second mask, the child would continue being upset. To have more than one mask is to have an infinite number of masks. And that gets us to what is reality. People can they can deal with this question, what is human? We can talk about it. But when we start talking about what is reality, things get really weird. And people don't want to talk about it. It's kind of terrifying. It's the layers going all the way down, all the way down. Phil had a couple of solutions for this. If you read cosmogony and cosmology, he does say that reality is some kind of projected framework, which means that reality is false. What we're in right now is some kind of massive illusion that we can't tell what it is. He also thought it was some kind of a machine, and he couldn't really describe the machine. He did call the machine by a variety of different terms. At one point he calls it zebra, at another point he calls it vast active living intelligence system. And he never really quite got this solution for what reality is. However, he did eventually identify as an acosmic pantheist, which is a fun term to use at parties. We can use our language skills here. Acosmic, so he believes that the universe does not exist, therefore all religions must be true. And that was his identification. We've got about 10 minutes. I think that's enough time for me to try to answer this question for you. That's all I need. We've got the Ubik just in case. And we're gonna go into the second portion of our free product giveaways here. And I hope there's enough for everyone, because I traveled a long way to get this. This portion of our presentation is brought to you by Choosy. Be choosy and choose Choosy. For those of you who aren't aware of Choosy, well, it's a form of perpetual awareness.
Thank you.
You've got to be careful when you take it. Yeah, if you want to take us a little Choosy, it's completely optional. The first one's always free. You can't untake it, so that is problematic. Okay,
Everyone else gets one.
Okay, yeah. Liz has already had Choosy.
I've had this, yeah.
Yeah. If you don't want to try, you don't have to, but you can pass it along to someone else. If you want to keep it, that is just a nice little kind of a prize that you have today. And if you do need some stickers to advertise us, we do. Yeah, we do need more people. So I'll put these up here. You can all take one on your way out today. Now, for those of you who are wondering, what is Choosy? Choosy comes from the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. This is my very, very favorite book. For those of you who are, not yet doing your third semester research projects, I highly encourage you to do something that you love, because you will just love it more and more and more and more until you kind of start not remembering where the fiction ends and the reality begins. And in the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, there's this character. His name is Palmer Eldritch. Palmer Eldritch is this entrepreneur who's gone off to the Proxima star system and come back with this Choosy product. Choosy is, the slogan says, God promises eternal life. We can deliver it. And the book gets very strange. By the way, he's this sort of quasi-android character who's got these like horizontal pupils and this metal hand. He also has these big metal teeth. I couldn't get those. Sorry, they were all out at the big metal teeth store. And he's pushing this Choosy on everyone, and it's kind of weird because even though people are taking Choosy and they're getting this immortality, they don't really want it. They don't really like it, and also you can't get rid of the Palmer Eldritch character once you try it. You are kind of stuck with him forever. And philosophically, that's pretty close to having some kind of a faith or being religious. And I analyzed this book with two different things in mind. First, there's one other drug called Candy. And it's funny because within the Choosy, that's Bubblicious, by the way, it's not laced with anything other than ideas. And the Candy is this drug that sends you into this kind of alternate reality where it's shared. And people who take Candy really believe it's the real world. And they kind of go into this idyllic paradise where they get to live out these Barbie-like lives. And Choosy is a more potent form of Candy, and it's the competitor. And if you look at this from a philosophical perspective, Candy is identical to Albert Camus' absurdism. Albert Camus said, there can be nothing outside of this life. And I know that I don't know that there is anything beyond this life. And if you look at the myth of Sisyphus, he's got a lot of this philosophy. The drug Candy is very similar to that idea. There's nothing that exists outside of the simulation. Choosy, however, is more similar to Soren Kierkegaard's existentialism. Existentialism being the idea that there is something else out there. There is this greater thing that we don't know what it is, but we're going to try and find it. And throughout this book, if you read it closely, you can see the battle happening between the characters, between this guy named Leo Boulero, who's the pusher of Candy, and Palmer Eldritch, who's the pusher of Choosy. It's the same as the battling philosophies of Albert Camus and Soren Kierkegaard. And so if you kind of read all three of those together, you'll get some insight into what reality is. The great thing about this question is that each of you get to interpret it however you want. You're now choosers. You get to choose what you believe. And this is my choice, so let me share with you. This is what I've discovered.